Okay, we're
Did you
recording.
fingerprint him?
They're getting us old guys in first.
I know.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
You're good.
Okay. Well, hello. Anthony Cucazella and Ted Kessner, and we're interviewing Dr. William Duncan for the Historical Committee. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Duncan.
I'm happy to be here.
Bill, tell me something about your early life in Delaware, where you went to school, your family.
Well, I'm a native of Newcastle. Okay, and my father was the chief deputy United States Marshal for Delaware, and my mother was a school teacher.
She was paid, your father was paid by the U.S. government
Federal,
or
federal marshal.
federal marshal?
He was chief deputy United States Marshal for Delaware.
Mhm.
And I have an older brother. He's 5 years older than I am, who's still kicking. And we lived at 116 East 5th Street, which is between South Street, where the big lumber yard and the coal and oil and all those people were over that way, and Tremont Street. And right across the street from us was a African-American church. And they had a lot of activities in and out of that church. And in our little town there, as we grew up, without our fellow black adolescents, we couldn't field a baseball team. Okay?
Uh-huh.
And the reason for that primarily was the war came. I was born in 1930. And during the war, everybody 18 to 40 or more were gone. And so our fathers, my father went, and a lot of the fathers were in the Guard there in the Company H of they have a big army there. And we're World War I veterans. And I had a babysitter. I had a babysitter who was 85 years old,
Uh-huh.
who was born a slave,
Oh, my.
lived across the
Yes.
street. And every morning, I'm sure, beginning when I was a toddler, my mother would hand me off to him, and we would go, and he would teach me about all the birds, and we'd get down. Battery Park is right, inns right there. So we would go down to the Battery Park and throw stones in the river, or there was nothing fancy there, but we had a lot of wildlife back behind the what was called then JT&LE Elias. And so that's the environment in which I was brought up. And my mother used to feed the people who would, what were they? I want to say vagrants, but they weren't really vagrants. These were people from the Depression. I mean, I was a Depression baby. And she had apparently there's some little sign on our house somewhere, and the railroad track was on 7th Street, right behind us. And every now and then somebody would knock on the back door and she'd feed them.
Oh, my. Then, so your father was in the reserve, but he didn't
National
actually.
Guard.
National.
He was
did he
executive
actually?
officer of
Did
the
he actually
198th.
serve in the war at all?
He was in World War I.
Yeah.
And he served in both theaters in World War II. He went away with the Guard in September of 1940.
And
came
then-
back when I was 16.
And where did you go to high school?
William Penn High School.
And you
Which is not the William Penn you know
Yeah.
today.
And you graduated when?
I didn't graduate. My mother, when my father was away in the war, they had made some type of an investment in a development company called Witzel. And they had bought a spec house at 31st and Van Buren Streets.
There's a real estate company, Witzel. Is that the same
Yeah,
family?
and a builder. And our 31st Street at that time was the last street, but the high school, P.S. DuPont High School, was still there. So they decided to, I have no clue. I mean, I was, 14 years old, I guess, at the time. So my mother took a job in Wilmington, at the Greenwood bookstore in the Delaware
Yeah.
Trust Building. And we moved to 31st and Van Buren Street while they were still building these houses. And I graduated in 1947 from Piesta Pond High School. And then I went to the University of Delaware for a year. That's where I did my pre-med. So when I decided eventually to get out of the regular Army,
So then how did you end, you went to Delaware for a year,
yeah,
And
I wasn't old enough to go to West Point. I was only 17.
and you got an appointment from whom?
Well, that's a lot of these things I think are interesting. Okay.
Go ahead.
The J. Caleb Boggs was the senator,
Yeah.
and he was a very good family friend, but he was a Republican. Okay,
Yes.
and that was not a good thing in my household. Okay, so in those days you had a principal and you had 3 alternates. If the principal was qualified, he made it, well, the 3rd alternate never made it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but my academics were such at the University of Delaware that I didn't have to take any exams. All I needed to do was the physical and the physical education part. So I got on the train, I went down to Washington, went down to Walter Reed, and if you can see an auditorium, a gymnasium with 600 naked guys wandering around, and it's a sight to see, okay? And so I had my physical. Well, when I went to register, the guy looked at my papers and he said, saw my academics, and acknowledged that they would be very good. You know, that was fine. But then he said, well, you've applied for at large, an appointment at large. He says, you can't have both. He says, the only way you can have the Boggs thing is if you waive your academics and use your competitive examination, which was 2 days long, which I wasn't prepared for. I just went down for the physical. And I said, well, third alternate? Yeah, you gotta be kidding. So I signed the papers that I would waive the fact that I could get in there on my academics. And
So you took a chance doing that.
yeah. So I called my mother on the phone and I said, I won't be home this afternoon. I'm staying down here. And I told her what I had done. And she said, well, you know, that's the way it is. So I took the exams. It was a morning, an afternoon, a morning, and afternoon. I forget all the subjects that we covered, plus an interview with a psychologist, I guess. And so I came home and I said, Mom, you forget it. This isn't going to work. And by the way, I got a scholarship at Delaware doing washing dishes. I'll come back to that later. But in any event, one Sunday afternoon, some weeks or days later, phone rings and it's Senator Boggs. My mother answers, he wants to talk to you. So I pick up the phone and he identified himself. He says, we have a decision to make. I said, we do? He said, you won both appointments. Which one?
You went the senatorial and the competitive.
The competitive, yeah.
Yeah.
So how I did in the academics down there must have been okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, which one do you want? Well, my at-large was as the son of a deceased veteran of World War II, because my father died as a result of the war. I mean, he went away when I was 10, came back when I was 16, 6 months later, he's dead. So I want the one, the son of the deceased veteran. Okay. Well, all that did was give those Republicans another slot to put somebody at the military academy, and that's how I got in. But we had after my father died, my mother applied for it was war related, and she got mixed up with the Veterans Administration, and he didn't, and she started getting the pension that they had for World War I, which was like, she got like $85 a month for herself and $35 a month for me, because I wasn't 21 yet. And you can't live on that. You know, you just can't, you can't do that. So, and the tuition at Delaware, like then, it was like $600 a semester. It wasn't a lot of money, but we couldn't afford it. And buy food and do all those things. It had a nice house and all that, and good clothes. But so I went to the university and looking for a scholarship. Well, I wasn't ever smart enough for them to have a scholarship, but I was smart enough to take the exams and stuff. So this is what my daily schedule. When I rented a room on Delaware Avenue. I got up early in the morning and went up to Old College and served breakfast in a chow line. Okay, not a problem. At noontime, I had to be down at Kent Hall. At Kent Hall, I waited on the faculty, and I spilled a bowl of soup in my biology teacher's lap one afternoon.
On purpose?
That went over big. And then at nighttime, I was responsible for the kitchen at Kent Hall. Now, luckily, I'm responsible to get all the dishes washed. The only thing that was good about that was that they had apprentices, chefs, that cooked the meals for the ladies down there. So I didn't have to worry about pots and pans, but I worried about dishes. Meanwhile, I started dating this girl who's been in high school with me. She was a big athlete, you know, ended up being an All-American field hockey player and all that stuff. But in any event, so she was there, and we started dating, and we really didn't know one another until we both got to the university. So in any event, that's what I did, and I got my tuition. By doing those three things, I got my tuition, not a problem. And every now and then, people would give me used books and that type of thing. So I got my appointment. I went to Delaware. That's where I did all my pre-med. That's the reason after 8 years in the military, when I applied to medical school, I only needed like 6 hours of biochemistry.
That you took your freshman year?
Yeah.
Those courses?
All the requirements by the medical school of mandatory subjects.
You took your first year?
I took that 1 year while I was at Delaware, because my mom wanted me to be a doctor. Okay, I wanted to be a soldier. You know, I wanted to be a soldier, so I ended up with both, which was good. So I went to the military academy and went through.
Did you keep the same girlfriend through the military?
I married her.
Oh, very good.
I married her, and she used to come up there and visit. You know, the answer is yes.
Yes. So then you got through your 4 years at West Point,
right,
then into the military.
Right, the
but
infantry.
was medicine in the back of your mind?
Well, I took pre-med. All my subjects
so
at Delaware.
Even though you were military, you still had
My
the
mom
goal.
wanted me to be a doctor, okay? And I wanted to be a soldier. I ended up doing
being both. Yes.
Which was okay. So I went to Fort Benning and did my basic training, officer basic training. And then I went to airborne school, and then I went to jump master school, where we learned to throw 105 howitzers out of the back of an airplane and that type of thing. You know, jeeps and even a turn.
Did you ever jump?
Oh yeah, you had to. There's no question. I think when it was all over, I had like maybe 27 or 28. But see, as a second lieutenant with almost no knowledge, okay, of the Army.
Yeah.
I had all the schooling I was supposed to have. They needed we were supposed, it was the 508th Airborne Regimental Combat Team. We were supposed to go to Europe and become the guard for SHAPE, for the Supreme Command of the NATO forces. But the Russians apparently wrote some kind of a note and said that we'll look at that as an act of war.
Bill, to keep us up to date, about what year was this when you were in the...
52, 53.
All right.
52, 53. And so we never went. But in the meanwhile, as a second lieutenant, with no experience, I'm selected to become the battalion S4. Okay?
And an S4 means what, Bill?
Logistics.
Okay.
Logistics. So here I am signing for millions of dollars worth of buildings. everything, you know. Second lieutenant. Now I had a good sergeant. You always have to have a good sergeant. So I had a good sergeant who looked out for me. And one of my tasks was, each of the battalions had its own little bar, its own little club. I had to go inventory all the booths and all the clubs, and everybody's trying to get me to drink this or that or the other thing. But in any event, it was an interesting time. So when it was time, when we weren't going to go to Europe, they started plucking us out one by one, and in 1953, and sent us to Korea. And so I ended up in Korea in A Company of the 17th Infantry of the 7th Division. The war had wound down, okay, though it was still combat or wartime situation. But a classmate of mine by the name of Richard Shea had been, a few weeks earlier, had been awarded the Medal of Honor at Pork Chop Hill. Okay.
There was a movie, Pork Chop Hill.
Right.
Yes.
And you talk about shoes hard to fit into. You don't go in, as a platoon leader in the same company that this guy won the Medal of Honor. All right. Well, the company was actually pretty much decimated, so we were pulled out off the line, and we became referred to as what's a soldier who's a policeman other than an MP?
Ted?
I can't think of. But anyway, we became. That's terrible. The old brains are not working today.
Was a different term than military police?
Yeah. They had
Well,
units of them in Europe, in Berlin. They created units with the same name, but be that as it may. So people don't realize this, but southwestern Korea was always the seat of communists. So when they had the Incheon landings and cut them off, everybody, North Korean, went into that area. And they were creating all kinds of problems down there. So my company was given a platoon of Korean national policemen and some other.
It's not me.
And,
Oh.
and we went down.
Go ahead.
And our job was to go down and clean this place.
Oh, it's Ted's. When it cut. Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Apologize for that.
And so that's what we did. I mean, we had our little firefights and that kind of stuff, but it wasn't it might have been, it was a more, well, put it this way, it was a more personal war, because you could see the people. You didn't have any artillery. You had 60-millimeter mortars, but you didn't have any artillery or anything.
Was this before the ceasefire?
Right after,
Right after the
After.
ceasefire? Okay.
and for the next several months.
Okay.
So that's basically.
So you were there for how long in Korea?
Well, I put in my papers to resign, and so they extended me for 5 months. So I was there for 17 months rather than 12.
So then you served active duty for how many years then?
Well, excluding the military academy,
Yes,
active Army,
active Army,
3 years.
3 years. And then did you seek a discharge or what?
I joined
You still had the goal of medical school?
By that time, I had a wife and 2 children.
Oh my.
Okay, and I joined the Pennsylvania National Guard as an infantry officer. I was still first lieutenant. All my classmates were captains already.
So then what year did you apply to medical school?
59. I'm sorry, 55,
55.
because I graduated in 59.
And when you applied, were you still in office or were you still in
Yeah,
the
I
military?
said 111th Infantry down in South Broad Street.
So you resigned your active duty and went into reserve,
Right,
correct?
right.
And you continued in reserve
Yes.
really the rest of your
Right,
career?
and my father had recruited a whole bunch of officers from the University of Delaware, ROTC, in 1933, and they were all the big wheels in the Delaware Guard at that time.
Mhm.
Joe Scano was the adjutant. Fellow by name, he was the adjutant general, and the 116th Surgical Hospital, Delaware National Guard, had been called on active duty during the Berlin crisis. Okay. The doctor, who was the commander, who I repressed his name, I couldn't have remembered it anyway. But anyway, the first thing that he went on active duty, he was short $52,000 worth of equipment. that should have been with him. And they had all kinds of fist fights, and they were stationed down at Fort Bragg, and apparently there was still, even though Harry Truman had signed the integration laws and all that stuff, there was still a lot of problems, and drinking and carousing and whatnot. So again, the telephone rings, and it's Joe Scano, and he says, we need a hospital commander. Would you come down to the Hotel DuPont into the green room and have lunch with us? I said, sure, why not? So I did, and then Wardell was there. Kelly was there. I can't think of all their names, but they were all colonels. They were all colonels and generals and that type of thing. And so they convinced me. They bribed me by saying if I would switch from the infantry. I mean, by this time I was a major of infantry. If I would switch from infantry to medical, I had no more schooling. Don't have to go to that stupid school about how to fire a rifle and all that kind of stuff. And you could serve a grade higher. So even though the commander on the TO&E called for a lieutenant colonel, you can be a colonel, you know. You're me.
So that sounded very good to you.
That sounded good.
Were you a physician by this time?
Yes, I was.
Tell us, Bill, let's go back a little bit. 2 children in medical school.
Right.
How did you survive financially through that?
Working.
During medical school, what did you do?
Well, in those days, if you were a veteran, okay, they had what was called veterans preference, and it worked. Doesn't work now, but it worked then. So, in Christmas time, Thanksgiving time and Christmas time, I delivered mail in Northeast Philadelphia. In the summertime, because my degree was military science, but it was basically civil engineering, I worked in the summertime for the Corps of Engineers, at the Philadelphia office of the Corps of Engineers. And then I would do stuff.
So your experience in the Army and then afterwards was financially beneficial to you.
Oh, you
getting
bet.
through medical
and it
school.
is today. It still is.
Did the military help pay for your medical education at all?
Well, the federal government did.
The federal government did.
Right, not Delaware. It didn't pay for Delaware, but it paid for the United States Military Academy. You're a cadet.
But did the U.S. government help pay for your medical education?
Oh yeah, I had GI Bill. I had
GI Bill.
I had the Korean GI Bill. It wasn't as good as my brother's World War II GI Bill, but it was good. And I worked nights at the library at Temple University, and I forget all the things they trumped up for me to do to earn some money.
Where did you live in Philadelphia?
4538 North 13th Street.
45 North. So you were that.
Now, keep
go
in
ahead.
mind that.
So you were 45 blocks above City Hall then, if I'm correct. Yeah.
Let's see, what was the Roosevelt Boulevard?
Oh,
Roosevelt Boulevard did not exist when we moved in. Okay, did not exist. We had a beautiful park right at the foot of our street. Had a swimming pool. It had a working carousel. It had all these amenities, and the children could just walk over there, and it was safe, and nobody batted an eye, and that was good. So while we were there, though, they started to build Roosevelt Boulevard and destroyed that park.
oh my. So then, Bill, take us through, 4 years of medical school, and then what after medical school?
Internship
Where?
here in Wilmington.
At the Delaware Hospital?
Yes.
And who were some of your fellow interns? Do you remember?
I don't.
Any of whom went into practice in Delaware?
Most of them didn't. Most of them. See, back in those days, when you did something, okay, and you finished, you went home. Okay? And my wife's biggest disappointment is that none of our three children came home. One went to Georgia, one went to Indiana, and the other went to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we spent a lot of time traveling, you know. And that was the difference. And these guys sort of felt the same way. Now, I guess the popular person that you would know the most was Teixeira. Teixeira was a chief resident in surgery. Okay.
Reuben.
Yes.
Reuben Teixeira.
Yes.
Okay, and he was a character.
Yes, he was.
And I never testified against him in malpractice.
He, as you
either.
know, just died recently.
Yeah. I did not know that, but that's not unusual.
Then who was chief of medicine then? Do you remember?
Bob Flynn. No.
Was Lewis
No,
Flynn?
no. Lou Flynn, Bob's father.
Mhm.
Bob's father.
Okay.
And then Bob's uncle was chief of orthopedics.
Irving. Yes.
What year were you an intern? What year were you an intern?
I'd be 59, 60.
Okay.
And in those days, you were encouraged, to go out and practice because they needed physicians out in the community, and that's what I did. I had my office at 4538. That's where I lived at the Falk and Silverside.
So
Road.
then after internship, did you go into a residency or did you go into practice?
Can't you ask that?
Go ahead.
There was no such thing as general practice or family practice. They existed and they were everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. So there were three major hospitals. Each had a department of medicine, each had a part of pediatric. You had to apply for medicine at Delaware. And then you had to apply for medicine at the Wilmington General. And you had to go before the board of what, two or tee docs for those specialty to get your stamp to be able to practice in those hospitals. And that's the most postgraduate education that I had.
Was that a friendly situation, or were there obstacles?
Well, for us, the applicants, it was friendly.
Right.
Because they wanted us sending their patients there. And the most aggressive group of the whole group was Memorial Hospital.
Aggressive in what sense?
Trying to get you to come there to practice.
Okay.
And to admit patients.
But they didn't have a residency, or they had a formal program of rotating students and postgraduate students through their different departments at the Memorial Hospital, which the initial name was homeopathic.
Right.
It was a homeopathic hospital.
Right.
And so, and the same thing was going on at the Wilmington General. So they had, the Delaware had formal intern residencies. The General, I think, had a formal internship. I don't think the Memorial did. And of course, we had Riverside out on Governor Prince Boulevard.
Right.
Was active in those days.
Where was your office?
Silverside, Falk and Silverside Road.
So you went into what was the suburbs?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
to the Shell station.
Yeah.
It looks like a split level house.
Yeah.
That's where I had my office. And I don't want to say Teshida, but that's not right. Tequilus was in the office. He had the upstairs and I had the downstairs.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It was a split level. And he had the upstairs, I had the downstairs.
And then, how many years?
8.
And when did you go into administration? You were in practice.
I went into
Tell us about your
I went in-
administrative career.
I went into administration almost immediately. Barrett Heckler.
Yes.
Barrett Heckler was the director of the internships and the residency programs at the Delaware Hospital, and he resigned for some other reason that I don't know. I mean, in other words, he didn't have the job anymore. Bob Flynn was in Europe in the Air Force, I guess. So they came to me, Mr. Griffith, who's the big cheese down there at those days, came to me and asked me if I would become the director of education for the Delaware Hospital.
You were how many years out of medical school?
Well, I'm about 33. I'm 31 or 33
All
years.
right, yes, yes.
I was no spring chicken by those time. And I said, sure, why not? I'll do it. So I became the director of medicine, or for the interns and residents, for I think 2 years. 2 years. And then, because I didn't kill too many people in the emergency room, because only interns manned the residents, the emergency rooms. The Wilmington General Hospital emergency room sent a kid out who got home and died. Okay. And this particular case was put in, just like the education things in Delaware, was put in with a group of others, and it got to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, you guys are really nutty. You have your least trained doctors taking care of your most seriously ill patients, and that doesn't make sense. And all of a sudden, overnight, we had to have licensed doctors in the emergency rooms.
Who had been there prior to that?
I guess each of the departmental directors, the surgical guy was responsible for covering the surgery. The interns rotated through.
So it was house staff who ran the emergency
right,
room.
Yeah.
No full-time staff.
So the first thing I had to do after that was to go recruiting. And that's where your Shahs and I can't name it.
Yeah.
I had so many people. I was responsible.
Corbelis, was he around at that time? Ben Corbelis?
Yes. Ben was Ben was here. He was practicing surgery, and one of the things that we did. But by this time, I say I'm the head of the emergencies, and by this time, '64, the merger had taken place. So I'm taking care of 3 emergency rooms rather than one, and we went out to bid to get a group. Somebody put together a group, and there were 3 groups that were put together. Ben Corbelis put one together. Mansouri and Marvati and
yes.
some of these names.
Yeah, go ahead. You're doing fine.
Are coming back to
Yes.
me now. And one of the anesthesiologists at the Delaware, not the big cheese, not the painter, not the big cheese, but in any event, he put together a group, and then there was an outside group from perhaps Jefferson, because things are starting to tighten up with Jefferson about that time also. And Ben Corbelis's group was selected to start to provide that service.
Were you involved at all in the merger, or did you have any input into that? You had an executive position in a way.
Well, no. Well, the merger didn't take place overnight. First, they had to have the board's merger, and then they had to create their own bylaws, and then they had to do this, and then they had to do that, and then they had to do the other thing, and then they had to combine the nursing schools, and then this. So it took quite a bit of time. But when they finally created the first management team for the Wilmington Medical Center, when all these other things had happened, then that's when I was invited by the guy from Canada, whatever his name was.
Shortlift?
Shortlift.
Shortlift.
Ernest Shortlift. Ernest Shortlift.
When I came into practice, he was the #1 guy. But
Right. He
go
had
ahead.
his office in the Academy
Yes.
of Medicine. So,
May
Go
I?
ahead. Of course, Ted.
I'm interested in your observations when you first were an intern in Wilmington and then went into practice in Wilmington. What were your observations of the medical community in terms of size, number of doctors, specialists, collegiality, things like that?
well, when I first got here, it was strong, because each hospital had their own little cliques.
Right.
Okay, and they were very, very strong and loyal to one another,
Within the hospital community,
right within that hospital community.
of which there were 3.
Right. Well, actually, if you put
St.
Riverside
Francis.
because one of the things that I did early was to get the osteopaths, the Stan Bilskis and those people on the staff of our hospitals.
And that was a bit controversial for a
Right,
while.
yeah.
I was around at that time.
I've never had any controversy. So I would say it was really, but once the competition started, it changed.
Okay.
It really did. It changed. Now, my position was sort of tenuous because running 3 emergency rooms, I had to be careful not to show any favors to somebody for doing something or not doing something. Or
And at the time, they were independent emergency rooms.
yes, right. And I had to consolidate them.
Right.
I can tell you one story about consolidating the memorial. The State Highway Department decided one day to put a 9-inch I-beam across Augustine Bridge. Okay. Meanwhile, I had closed the Memorial Emergency Room, which left the Delaware and the General and Riverside.
Right.
One sunny afternoon, a dump truck is coming down the hill there, and there are 2 African Americans standing in the back of the truck, leaning against the cab,
Right.
looking where they had been,
Right.
not where they had gone.
Right.
The guy was going at a very high rate of speed, And the next thing we knew, there were two heads lying in the back of the truck.
Yeah.
It was a big confab. You look at a guy he had the headlines on the News Journal, accused of black genocide. Okay, because if I had kept that memorial emergency room open, they would be alive today. Then that was the atmosphere. And that was probably, and it wasn't too soon after that, we had the riots and had all kinds of stuff happening here in this town.
Why would they have been alive under those conditions had the memorial ER been
They would
open?
not have.
They were decapitated.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been alive.
Yeah.
No.
But they, yes,
Does that make a difference?
Yeah.
That didn't make a difference to those
Yeah.
people.
yeah, Bill has described that very well, because I remember the newspaper headlines and the like.
There was a fellow by the name of Hicks Anderson. You cross Hicks Anderson, okay? And you have, I don't know, maybe you have a big construction project going over on Governor Prince somewhere. In 90 minutes, he could put 200 people in that street and you'd never get a truck through. Okay? That was it.
Huh.
So, Bill, let's go back to, so the merger has occurred. You're working for then the Wilmington Medical Center.
Yes.
And when did you start looking, maybe going elsewhere, meaning St. Francis? Tell us how that came about.
Okay, well, I attended lots and lots of those community meetings with Hicks Anderson, and I can't think of all the other black individuals with whom I dealt over and over again. But it seems that every time I went to one of these meetings, the administrator of St. Francis, which was Sister William Mary, sat here, and I sat here. And we chatted and chatted and chatted. And they were talking about moving out of town and doing this and doing that and doing the other thing. And the Sisters of St. Francis, who owned them, said, you can't leave the city. You just can't leave the city. Okay, so somewhere along the line, they came up with several millions of dollars and decided to renovate. At that moment, the fellow by the name of Dick Long had come down, and he had taken over as the first lay administrator of that hospital ever. And I was invited to come over there to be their director of ambulatory, director of ambulatory service.
This would have been about what year?
I started to work over there on Memorial Day. I didn't even realize it was a holiday.
What year?
I'm
What
trying
year?
to think.
Must have been in the middle 70s?
Yeah, probably 78.
Okay.
Probably 78.
No, it was before that, because when I came in '75, you were there.
Was it St. Francis?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so
This
we'll
was
say,
six,
yes,
I don't know.
yes.
I don't remember.
and I remember there was a Wally Cannon,
Wally Cadden was
the number
second
2
with,
man.
who
Yes.
was with Dick Long.
Yeah.
He came with,
Yeah.
with Dick Long. And so when this job offer was made to me, I dealt with 3 board members. It was Harrington, I remember, and the fellow who was head of the News Journal at the time, and I forget who the third one was. Those are the 3 people that I dealt with, and was allowed to deal with them. So when this offer came from St. Francis, it was significantly greater than the salary I was getting as the director of ambulatory services at the medical center. I went to these 3 guys and I told them I got this offer, and their attitude was nice enough, but they said, I don't have the right tickets. You know, I don't have a degree in administration or hospital this or hospital that, and I haven't done this and I haven't done that and I haven't done the other. the other thing. So I said, oh, okay. And they said, and I think I was getting like $50,000 a year
At
at that time.
the Wilmington Medical Center.
Yeah. So I moved across. I moved across town. Didn't have to dislocate my family or anything. But it was it's all right.
Did you, did any of your fellow physicians comment negatively or positively at that time? Do you recall?
No. I mean, I had a pretty good relationship throughout the community. No, I mean, I think a lot of them started to see me leave because I protected their ass all the time. Hey,
We can edit that.
we had a cardiologist, okay, who on call at night would give the phone number of a motel where he was shagging up with his mistress. Okay.
We won't ask any names.
Oh no, but so
Uh-huh.
I'm. What do I do? The other thing is, these guys get to be old. They get to become old guys, like the poem there. There's a patient up in the Delaware hospital somewhere, and they have diabetes, and the nurse doesn't know exactly what the order says. What does the order say about the insulin at 2 o'clock or whatever the thing was? And so the nurse goes to the phone and calls the attending. Some female, lady, girl, somebody answers the phone and says, well, the question is asked. She says, will you just wait a minute, I'll get an answer for you. Comes back on the phone and says, he says 10 units of regular insulin, please, stat. Okay. Hangs up the phone, looks up, and here comes the guy walking down the hallway. Okay. You want to talk about malpractice?
Bill, we've talked a lot about your medical career. How about your military career during this time? What were your activities with the military?
Well, the first thing that happened, within the first year of being the hospital commander, the Department of the Army took away all my perks. They sent me back to school. They wouldn't promote me a grade higher. All the things that were supposed to happen if I became a doctor. But the interesting thing was they had waited. I'm doing physicals, okay? I'm still wearing my cross rifles. There are photographs of me doing physicals with my stethoscope and everything, in my uniform with my cross rifles. No caduceus. So I was very late in them, because in those days, to get a direct appointment as a lieutenant colonel, you had to have been a doctor for 17 years.
Wow.
I had been a doctor for 3.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, we overcame that also. So now in those days, almost my experience in Korea and in the regular army for that part, my experience was that every 105 artillery battalion commander had been called on active duty and was a minister. All of them were ministers. Every time I turned around, it's the Reverend this is a Lieutenant Colonel artillery shooting 105s. All right, well that's okay. Well, there was no restrictions in changing branch if you were willing to qualify for that branch. Well, I was already pre-qualified for infantry, so I applied to get out of the medical corps and go on the line. And at that time, the Delaware National Guard was reorganizing from artillery to signal corps. And since the first chief of signal had been a hearing specialist, I was a natural, I guess. But in the event, I switched. I went from medical corps back to signal corps. And when I retired as a major general of the line.
You were still in the Signal Corps at that time.
Yes. And we had a worldwide commitment. That was a fun position to be in.
During your administrative career, both at the Wilmington Medical Center and St. Francis, did you have any private practice at all?
When somehow or other, I became the medical director of any number of nursing homes. And a lot of my high school teachers were in these different nursing homes right here in Wilmington. You know, so I see them all the time. Miss Bryson and Mr. Loomis and all these other people. And so that was my private. When they died off, I didn't have any more private practice. Though I was certified. I was certified to do air traffic controllers, airline pilots, people who wanted to professionally race motorcycles, deep sea divers. So I had a small office in my house where I could do these physicals. Because nobody, they didn't pay you anything, and these guys would want to go diving in the ocean and let them go dive.
Yeah. Doesn't Bob McKellenberg do that type of
Well, he took over
work
from
now? Oh, he
yeah.
okay.
I handed it all
Yes.
that to him. And here again, that was my military connection. Because most of those started when I was in practice. Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to be a, what do you call the guys in the cars where they shoot off? It was a big deal for automobile racing.
Drag.
Drag.
Okay.
Professional drag racers.
Bill, let's go then. When did you retire, or when did you start thinking of retirement?
I told Paul King.
This was about when?
62.
No.
1992.
92.
I told Paul King, and on my when I became 62.
Mm-hmm.
When I became 62, I was leaving. I hadn't went back, but I met him going, and he convinced me to stay another year. So I actually retired from St. Francis in '93, January or February of '93.
And tell me what you've been doing since that time. 93. I know you've been very active
Well,
with the Historical
because
Society
yeah.
and the like.
Mostly that kind of stuff that I like to do. I did a lot of woodworking. I used to refinish furniture. That's another side of my life that was much earlier that you haven't heard about, and that is because of World War II. All of us adolescents were apprenticed out to places to promote the war effort. And I was placed down in a wood mill. And my basic job was to sweep the place up and keep it clean and whatnot. And all these old guys who were in there, they were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they were making the most beautiful cabinets and everything. Okay, and I swear to God, they never used a ruler. It just came, and they're chopping away, making cloth feet for things. Well, one day I went in there to sweep the floor, and they had bought me a whole set of tools and made me a workbench. And they started teaching me how to do cabinetry. How to become a cabinet maker.
So it's become a great hobby then.
So it became a great, I made lots of furniture, even when I was doing all these other things. And I still have all the machinery I need to do it. So I don't think would be very safe doing it these days.
Do you have any further questions, Ted?
Yes. You had a long professional career. This has two parts. What things that you accomplished are you most proud of? And what things may you like to have accomplished that for various reasons you were unable to do? So the first part is, what are those things that you're most proud of that you accomplished in your career?
Well, I would say that taking the 3 hospitals, 3 medical clinics, 3 surgical clinics, 3 pediatric clinics, 3 whatever, and getting the cooperation and having these guys sit down and select, we're going to put ophthalmology at the memorial. Do it. We're going to put obstetrics at the general. Do it. You know, that type of thing. I would say that be the co-op, and I'm taking credit for this, but that's hard to deserve. But in any event, moving the wheels to make this stupid merger work was, I think, would be
That is significant.
would be one of the at the top of the list
Good
Okay.
question.
for so far as medicine was concerned. On the military side, you can't name a board from the Department of Defense or the Department of the Army that I probably didn't serve on at one time or another.
Okay.
And by virtue of that, when they created the Army Historical Foundation, I was one of the charter members of the foundation board. And they're now creating the Museum of the United States Army.
Up in Carlisle?
No. It's Heritage. That's the Heritage Group. This is at Fort Belvoir,
Okay.
Virginia. I'm surprised you haven't gotten a million pieces of mail about it.
Okay.
But I would say it's another thing getting it off the ground, and starting to get the funding and getting the right people on the board and doing this and that and the other thing. I think
Okay.
that I'm proud of that.
Okay.
Can I pause this for just